that one still chills me to the max. And let's hear more about that and a lot of other great things from our special guest, Barrie Chase. So, you told me it had been a long time since you'd seen it.
Yeah.
What are your first take impressions?
Mitchum was incredible. He was fantastically attractive as a horrible person.
That's very well put. You had several scenes with him. When did you first meet him?
I didn't. They forgot to introduce us, and so yeah.
That might have been on purpose.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, we were rehearsing the first scene that I did in the bed when I was being seductive on the bed, and we hadn't met, and he was stripped to the waist, and he was standing over the bed, and. Well, he made it very clear that he had nothing on underneath his pants.
Good old Bob.
Yeah. But it struck me very funny. I laughed as you are laughing, and I guess that was the right thing to do, because after that, he was very, very kind to me and very protective, as though I were his kid sister. And what have we got here?
Yeah, I think there's I think some of the swamp from the Indian Cape Fear is swallowed. Were you a little apprehensive in working with him?
Sure. Are you kidding? Yeah. No. I was thrown in the big leagues, and
right.
that wasn't my. I was a fish out of water and trying to do my best. And
I bet you were great, actually. That whole particular. That scene with Kelly Savalas, where you're, kind of coming to terms with being brutalized by Mitchum, and he's trying to convince you to testify, and you're kind of stumbling around, but you could see that dancer instinct and how you were moving around the room and taking that. I thought it was great.
I don't know. Yeah. I had been, told a lot of terrible things, what he had done to me, and so I was just thinking about that.
Right. Well, it did definitely.
Anyway, yeah. In that scene, another Mitchum story, when we were rehearsing it, and I was running away from him, getting off the bed and running away, he came up to me and said, it looks like you're waiting for him to catch you. So, and Mitchum said, oh yeah, no, don't do that. He said, you just get up and you run, I'll get you, don't worry about that. So the next rehearsal, I was out the door and I hadn't been touched. You
were faster than Bob.
Yeah, quite a bit. So, in that department anyway. And so, he said, slow it down just a little bit. So, yeah, but he would, in the car scene, he'd been up all night, having a good time. And he said to me, when Lee comes by, just give me a little nudge, because he was going to sleep. And so I did, but he was totally prepared. He knew exactly what he was going to do and what it was all about, even though he would give the impression that he was winging it. But no.
Yeah,
as you could see by that performance.
Right. I remember reading either a bio or something about Mitchum and the Western he made with Wayne, Howard Hawks directed, and Hawks came up to him at a certain point and said, you try to give everybody the impression you don't give a damn, and you just show up and pick up the script. He said, but you really work hard, and Mitchum said, don't tell anybody.
Yeah, it was obvious that.
Yeah. So how did you get the part?
Well, I didn't know, and I guess I didn't really think about it that much. I was just going step by step, and they said to me, you have an interview with J. Lee Thompson for this movie. And I went, gosh, okay. And probably if he likes you, you've got this part. I didn't know till years and years and years later that it was Peck who had suggested me for the part and had said to Lee, you know, if you like her, I want her to do it. So I had the interview, and we ended up, I think they were called kitchen sink movies, the English movies,
Saturday night, Sunday morning.
Yeah. And I had seen a lot of those, which he couldn't, you know, how did that happen? Because at that time in Hollywood, people were not familiar, particularly with those movies. But I had a lot of time to kill when I was taking class morning and late afternoon and evening. So between those morning classes and the late afternoon, I found a little theater that showed foreign films. And it was cheap. And
you were an art house junkie.
Yes, I was. And they weren't called that then. They were just these little hole-in-walls. And I was fascinated by those movies. And so we got on well, Lee and I.
Great.
And he was responsible for he said, wear your own clothes. They were my own clothes. Yeah, Cy Bartlett, who was a very, was a producer on it, he was very, not on the same way, like, you know, no. And he wanted me to wear these kind of shirts with the knots in the center and the shorts and all that sort of stuff. And I'm like,
kind of like you were out on the boat.
Yeah, I don't know. And I kept saying, I don't think so. But Lee was very supportive, and he said, no, you just bring your own clothes in. And so he was cool. It was good.
That's good. Well, you were good. You were great. The movie holds up terrifically.
Well, how can Mitchum was just, wow.
Yeah, he just really radiated that malevolence and danger. And there's an interview I saw with Lee Thompson about this, and that whole series of in the lake and fighting with Peck in the water. And apparently there was a signal that Peck had worked out where Mitchum would hold him underwater, and he would either tap him in some way. And it was at night at Universal. It was cold, freezing, and they were doing this. And he said at one point, you know, Bob had to fortify himself at a certain point because it was cold, and he forgot the signal when he was holding back underwater. But your career, really extraordinary. Your dad, Barrie Chase, many of us still know as the great screenwriter, many westerns, Winchester 73. Your mother, an accomplished pianist, and you started taking ballet. Grew up in the Valley. Were you exposed a lot to show business, or did your father just? Yeah. My dad was a successful writer, and so there were a lot of people that he was writing for would come to the house a lot, and. But I had a very sheltered life. I didn't know it was sheltered at the time, but I was an only child, sort of, and I wasn't exposed to very much. Ended up eventually going to private school, but I thought it was great. You know, my dad, you couldn't stay in the house because it had to be quiet. You could have to tiptoe, and you couldn't make noise outside. But I thought that was fine. I didn't know any different. I was in my own imaginary world. But there were musicians there a lot, too. With my mom would play for hours every day. All kinds of music. So music became a very big part of my life. And it still is. Luckily. Yeah. How did the dancing start and evolve? I don't know. I just started moving. You just started moving from the beginning. I just heard the music, and I still do that. I hear the music, and I feel I move into it. Right. And then my mom took me to teachers, and because she was grounded as a musician, she knew the importance of getting good teachers. And so I was very fortunate that I had very good teachers. And, but then everything sort of fell apart. My parents got divorced, and life changed. I went to work. You went to work. Well, how did you go to work? How did you get your break getting in movies?
I took a long time to get a break. I was a lot of years in the chorus. I'd get a break, and then nothing would happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had to pay the rent, you had to have some food, so you went back in the chorus. And I was going out with a fellow called Stanley Kubrick.
Heard that name before.
Yeah, and he said to me, do you like what you're doing? I was in the chorus. He had seen me. That's kind of funny. He had seen me walking down the street, he said, and had asked about, who's that girl, you know. And, well, this is late at night. I can say what they told him. They said, well, you really don't want to mess with her. Her father married her sister, and she's a lesbian. So Stanley, the sweetheart that he was, said, oh, now I know I want to know. So anyway, he said to me, you know, I said, yeah, no, I'm not happy being in the chorus, but I can't seem to get out of it. So he said, well, there's one way you get out of it, and that's not do it anymore. Really obvious answer, but I said, well, I don't know, how do I live not doing it anymore? So he said, well, he had this company with Harris, and he said, we can put you on a minimum salary, but I think you ought to try it on your own. And there's a dramatic coach called Jeff Corey.
The great Jeff Corey.
The great Jeff Corey,
Yeah.
yes, indeed. And my dad was an anti-communist fighter, so I didn't think Jeff Corey was going to take too kindly to me since he lost his acting career.
Right, had to become
Yeah, had to become, yeah. So, but anyway, I went on the interview, and to Jeff's credit, he judged me for myself and not for my dad, and took me on. And that sort of segued into acting things.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I was under contract to Fox about a year before I did Fred's show. As I hadn't bent over for a year. Didn't do any dancing before the first Astaire show for about a year.